Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment, but first, some of today's top stories. Mayor Lightfoot and other public officials hype up the new Englewood Nature Trail. The trail is slated to be built on an abandoned rail track, much like the 606. It's located between 58th and 59th Streets and runs from Wallace Street to Hoyne Avenue. The project recently received a $20 million federal grant, but will need more than a few dollars to complete.
The trail will serve as both a physical connector and a pathway to community revitalization by providing new space where neighbors can enjoy the benefits of nature and access economic opportunities.
Workers were locked out of Chicago City Hall this morning for several hours, but that was the plan. Chicago police and fire officials conducted an active shooter training exercise to prepare themselves just in case an event like that ever occurred. The building stayed closed from 6 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon, and the actual exercise took about an hour.
Ultimately, the goal is to minimize these events. As you know, to stop these events is nearly impossible, as we see them occur across the country every day. But practicing this will keep us in better shape, keep our preparedness up to par, and keep our communications with our fellow partners at the best we can do.
And Illinois loses its long shot bid to become the first Democratic primary state in the nation. National Democratic Party leaders chose South Carolina to be the party's first primary state in 2024. That means the Iowa caucuses will not be first for the first time in 50 years. After South Carolina, the top 5 states in order are New Hampshire, Nevada, Georgia, and then Michigan. Chicago is still vying to host the 2024 Democratic National Convention. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are WBBM News Radio political editor Craig Dellamore, A.D. Quigg, politics reporter for the Chicago Tribune, Corley Jay of Crane's Chicago Business, and Dan Mihalopoulos, investigative reporter on WBEZ's government and politics team. On the agenda tonight, federal indicted Alderman Ed Burke finally calls it a career after 54 years. Mayor Lori Lightfoot and candidate Chuy Garcia submit their petitions to get back on the ballot. Garcia scores a major union endorsement while Lightfoot faces ethics complaints from a rival. A new report says property taxes went up the most in Chicago's Latino neighborhoods. Illinois lawmakers scram from Springfield after making changes to the controversial no cash bail bill. Republicans still aren't happy. Meanwhile, Democrats propose a statewide assault weapons ban, but it'll have to be taken up next year. President Biden signs legislation to avert a potentially crippling rail worker strike, leaving some unions fuming. And 2 controversial figures with anti-Semitic views and ties to Chicago dine with former President Trump. Wow, a lot to get to. So let's start. Dan, all right, we got to take a breath, I know. Start with the legacy of Ed Burke, Dan Mihalopoulos. I mentioned earlier this week he'll be remembered for that federal indictment, the Verdoliak 29, chairman of the Finance Committee and the workers' comp system. He'll be remembered for getting really rich and having, thanks to your reporting, the best plowed street in Chicago during big snowstorms. Until your reporting. Am I missing anything?
No, that's a pretty good summary. I mean, I think a lot of his legacy will depend on whether, he is convicted, because now he's innocent until proven guilty. But he's been under indictment for years and years. He's been an alderman and a Democratic committeeman since before I was born, so let's just say since the 60s. And, it's an amazing legacy, but it's bookended again by this corruption scandal when he sat there in office for several years and used a lot of the money that he raised to delay and delay and delay justice, whichever way that goes. And then the other bookend, of course, is his role on really the wrong side of history in the 80s, in the Council Wars era, which is a distant memory, if even within the memory of some of us here in Chicago now.
Opposing the first black mayor in the history of Chicago, Harold Washington.
Exactly, and he together with Eddie Verdoliak, the 2 Eddies, were sort of the leaders of the council majority that became a minority, but stymied the mayor during his first term.
Well, Greg Dellamore, I don't want to shortchange a 54-year career. There were some policy things that Ed Burke spearheaded.
Indeed, he was the person really moving the ban on indoor smoking, which was very controversial at the time, and the meetings were explosive in those days. In fact, people used to smoke in the city council, so it was a big fight. Also, he pushed for carbon monoxide detectors So yes, there are some things like that. He also fancied himself the historian of the city council, and that would come up not only in things that he wrote, because he has written, he is published, but also in his speeches on the floor. When something monumental would happen, he would be the one to wax.
He waxed poetic. He was known for his oratory. A.D. Quigg, he ran 4 years ago when he was already under indictment. Why hang it up now?
Well, I think there's a few reasons. Number one, his wife was retiring, Supreme Court Justice Ann Burke. That was a big deal. The trial date drawing closer, also his brother, Dan Burke, encouraged him to retire earlier, saying basically that he had health issues. He was getting up there in age. And I don't think it was just as much fun anymore, not leading the finance committee, not being the center of attention, not sitting at the front of the room. And
certainly not being the head of the finance committee, he did not have the profile that he once had.
And it wasn't the certainty either, because his district, his ward was remapped to take out his most virulent supporters and take that section out. So his chances of being reelected this time were much lower.
Right, mostly Latino ward, and the two challengers now are Latino. Dan Lopez, he's plowed through millions in campaign cash on these legal fees for 4 years. Is he going to run out of money? Because this thing might never go to trial.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where he's at right now, but at one time I think we added up his different campaign committees, and we're talking about like $12 million. Which
It's
is
way
huge,
down from that now.
Well, it's way down, but I mean, this is a guy who also has, we assume, personal wealth. Part of the case is his own private firm that he operated for many, many years while he was an alderman, while he was the finance committee chairman, and that's the accusation, basically, that he leveraged his power to benefit himself when this private law firm. So we don't have any sense of what his personal wealth would be exactly, but I have been told by people close to Ed Burke before that he saved everything. Like, he still has his First Communion money. So this is a guy who I do think has some resources, but he has also very, very expensive lawyers, former federal prosecutors themselves now.
Certainly white-collar criminal defense lawyers that he has to pay. Most expensive in the city. All right, Orly J., welcome to the show. So also this week, Mayor Lightfoot files her petitions to run again. Chuy Garcia files his petitions to run for mayor. He made a thing about his petition stack being this big, Lightfoot stack maybe being this big. Is that going to matter in the long run?
I don't think so. I think what really matters here is the backing that we see that Chuy Garcia got and some other candidates. Chicago being a huge union town and the whole thing with the Workers' Rights Amendment, I think that will matter more at the end of the day.
And Chuy Garcia gets the endorsement of Local 150, a big union, even though a lot of these other progressive unions already have picked their candidate. Is this gonna give him a boost?
Local 150 is big. I think it's going to be an interesting split to see where labor goes throughout this. So we know Brandon Johnson has Chicago Teachers Union, SEIU. Chuy has Local 150 associated with construction workers. Have a ton of money. Also got the rail workers. I'll be looking out to see what LIUNA does, what IBEW does, because union support is people on the ground, for one, but also in a lot of these cases, it's a lot of money. So I'll be interested to see where the rest of the split goes.
And there is a possibility that some of these unions are going to hold back until they see who's in the runoff, because this is a really wide field, and if you're going to commit your money, you want to be behind a winner.
Meanwhile, Lightfoot faces an ethics complaint that she took campaign money from the owner of the Chicago Fire, a team close to your heart, Dan Lopez. That team won her support to build a practice facility on former CHA housing land. Does this look bad or within the law here?
Yeah, I think it does look bad, actually. I don't know if it's within the law or not. There are all sorts of loopholes to these rules that are intended to prevent even the impression of pay-to-play. Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor, also had a lot of rules, but we found out through the years that there are massive loopholes that you can drive through. In this case, you have a guy who's a billionaire multiple times over, I believe, who owns a professional sports team, a Major League Soccer franchise, and, I don't think it's FIFA-level corruption or anything like that, but, this was land that was public housing. When they started knocking it down, they said they were going to replace it with a lot, and they haven't done it to the extent that they promised. Instead, that land is going to a professional franchise owned by a very rich guy who then gives $25,000 a couple months later to the mayor. And remember, she had to use some of her clout to push it through. There was resistance. There were questions about this practice facility on the west side. So I do think it's an issue of perception, maybe, and maybe more a violation of the spirit than the letter of the law.
We should mention that this complaint was filed by her nemesis, Ray Lopez, so there might be a little bit of sour grapes here. Orly J, do you think something like this might hurt her chances at re-election?
Oh, definitely. I definitely think it's going to hurt her chances. And I just want to say that the housing advocates sent a letter to the billionaire owner of the Chicago fire, and they were like totally outraged. They are demanding a meeting with him after this, and they consider it play to play too.
Yeah, right. The housing advocates, obviously, they thought they were promised replacement housing on that land. I want to talk about a report that came out this week from the Treasurer's Office. It shows that the total property tax levy in the county went up 4%.
What a shocker.
What a shocker.
Property taxes going up in
residential property taxes skyrocketed in some Latino neighborhoods. So Cook County Assessor Kagi addressed this with us last night.
The fact that there were such giant reductions in the values of commercial properties done by the Cook County Board of Review, that it shifted more burden not only onto Latino communities, but onto everyone.
And Latino communities that he's mentioning are like Pilsen. They're gentrifying a lot. So basically what he's saying is, I did what I promised I was going to do. I was going to shift the burden from residential to commercial, but the Board of Review decided to go the other way. Is this what's causing the rates to rise so much in some of these neighborhoods?
That's part of it. There's a lot at play. This was a very interesting report done by the Treasurer's Office. We need to keep in mind that levies went up. So the city of Chicago raised their levy. Chicago Public Schools raised their levy. TIFs are at play. So money getting socked into little TIF piggy banks means property taxes are going up for everyone else because that money's getting socked away. The COVID reductions that the assessor put into place also played a role. It lowered property values for residential, and then when they shot back up because the COVID market was so insane, it made people's bills basically skyrocket. So it's not just, we can't blame all of this on the Board of Review. There's a lot of stuff at play, but folks basically don't care what's at play. They see their bill going up and they're mad.
They open that envelope and they say, wow, I'm paying a little more
I've
this year
gotten
than
nonstop emails from folks saying my bill doubled, my bill tripled, and yes, homeowners are bearing more of the burden at the end of the day.
Is there any kind of recourse for them? I mean, as we mentioned, the commercial property owners using lawyers like Ed Burke, or at least back in the day, that's what he would do, and Mike Madigan, they'd go to the Board of Review and successfully get those bills down. I mean, what's the recourse for some of these homeowners?
Well, we are through this cycle, unless the assessor or property tax authorities have made some kind of mistake. There was one that actually flagged for the assessor's office. Someone was supposed to be getting their senior exemption that didn't. So they'll be in touch. So things like that, yes, you can get a recourse, but otherwise you got to wait till next year, and you're going to be getting another property tax bill that is due on March 1st.
And then the other impact you've got is in the gentrifying neighborhoods. Those people have been crying and in anger about what's going to happen when those taxes go up, the home prices go up because of more affluent people moving in. That's going to also play into, I think, the elections coming, because people are saying, we told you so. Yeah. We told you this was going to happen, and people are being forced out.
And it's going to be tougher to stay in these places as they gentrify. Craig, let's move to some news in Springfield. Late this week, Democrats finally passed some long-sought changes to the Safety Act, the no cash bail part of it. What are these changes, and will they assuage the prosecutors who are worried about this act going into law?
It won't assuage all of them, because some of them just really want to file a lawsuit to scotch the entire law, but it is satisfying some of them. What they ended up doing is adding some more crimes that will allow people to be held ahead of trial. With that, and remember now, cash bond goes away. I think people just think, well, if we start putting more money back, that's not, it's going to go away. The issue is that people can be held without bail. And now there's more offenses for that. That's the biggest change that they've made. They've also tweaked some of the formulas, but yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Orly.
They also added, if you are flight risk, then they issue a summons or arrest warrant for that, which is like kind of like really troubling for me, because I feel like a lot of people that are going to be like kind of like affected by that are people that like deal with everyday life situations who may not be able to make it to a court date. So that was kind of worrisome.
So what you're saying is the judge now can use an offendant's history of not showing up for court dates to deem them a flight risk, and thus they might have to be detained. So you're saying that some folks, that might get them caught up in the system because they had legitimate reasons for missing.
Right, like they missed their bus or anything like that. I feel like they can get caught up in that whole situation.
But they're being more, and one of the things that they have done is to be more specific about what kinds of standards can be used to keep someone. Before it was kind of amorphous. Yeah, now they are more explicit, and we'll have to see. But the bottom line is that they've had 2 years to work this out, and then they had to end up rushing to do it in a matter of months.
And the state's attorneys are going to have to prepare for these detention hearings. Are these officers ready for this starting January 1st?
You know, there were 100 out of 102 counties where the prosecutors were opposed, but last I heard, the Association of Prosecutors has, you know, come around on this, at least with the changes that were made in Springfield in the past week, and that presumably will be signed into law by the governor if that hasn't happened yet. So, you know, I think this was a thing that was a big issue during the campaign for the Republicans. In fact, I would say they banked pretty much all their hopes on that issue more than any other.
And it didn't seem to work.
It didn't work, and yet it did spur some of these changes to be made, although I think the sponsors would say that these are more clarifications than any sort of essential.
Right, a lot of the sponsors were saying, well, this stuff was true from the beginning, but maybe the language wasn't clear.
Well, and to go back to that, the worries about state's attorneys being ready, there was this fear that on January 1st, the doors of the jails would open up and folks would run out. That's not what's going to happen. They basically instituted a tier system, so lower level offenses are getting heard first, and in severity they'll get held within like 1, 60, or 90 days.
Yeah, and these are people who are being held who have to petition to be released. If they're already in jail, if you think you fall under this, you can ask for a hearing. So it's not going to be everybody, because some people are going to know that they probably don't have a shot.
There are a lot of steps that have to happen. Orly J., do you think that the state's attorneys and the public defenders are going to be ready to deal with all this come January 1st?
No, I can't really say. I don't feel like they are getting ready, but to say that they're going to be ready is, we have to see.
And there, some of the state's attorneys, the Kane County state's attorney said, well, I support this in principle, but not the way it is. The DuPage County state's attorney, who's been won over here? I haven't heard anything from any of them.
I haven't heard anybody say that
we know
they've
the Lake
been won
County
over.
state's attorney is cool with it, and Cook County is cool.
Cook County.
Long time a supporter, and Cook County has the largest jail population, I believe, of the state.
Right.
So they would have the biggest impact from this.
Well, also in Springfield news this week, State Representative Bob Morgan introduces some gun control measures to ban assault weapons, high-capacity magazines. Even though Democrats have had supermajorities, Craig, for a long time, gun control hasn't been the easiest thing to pass. Do these things, are they a cinch to pass in the next session?
Nothing is a cinch to pass. Gun legislation is not a Republican-Democratic issue. It is a Chicago
and downstate issue.
And that's going to still be the case. I spoke with the mayor of Highland Park, where they have an assault weapon ban, and they had one since 2013, even before the July 4th.
And it's been upheld by the
and it's
courts
been
as well.
upheld. And Mayor Nancy Rotering is very concerned that they have to convince people this can happen in your area too. This is not just Northern Illinois, and that it isn't taking guns away that people need. It's taking away warlike weapons.
And obviously, Damilopolis, Illinois doesn't exist in a bubble, so how impactful is a statewide ban when all the states surrounding Illinois have these guns freely available to purchase?
You know, that's an excellent question when we look at the history of all the legislation we've had here, and yet stuff floods in from Indiana, which is, you know, not very far. It borders the city itself and much of the state. So, you know, there was a federal assault weapons ban. People forget at one time, and it was only from 1994 till 2004 when it expired. And I don't see that happening again.
Biden has proposed, or he wants to reinstitute that, but it doesn't seem like there's any political will to do that.
Right. But here in Illinois, if it doesn't happen after what happened on the 4th of July in Highland Park on that main street and that parade, oof. I mean,
what happens in Chicago all the time? What happened in Garfield Park? 11 people.
Yes.
Shot in a span of 3 seconds. Let's move on to some national news. At the behest of President Biden, Congress passes legislation to avert a rail strike, and Biden signed that bill into law this morning.
Our nation's rail system is literally the backbone of our supply chain, as you all well know, and so much of what we rely on is delivered on our rail, from clean water to food and gas and every other good. Rail shutdown would have devastated our economy. Without freight rail, many of the U.S. industries would literally shut down.
So, Orly J., some of the unions were still holding out here. Are they upset that this law passed and they basically have to go back to work and can't strike?
Yeah, they're very upset. They wanted the 7 days of the paid sick leave, which wasn't part of this deal. So the deal that Biden signed is just the deal that they did back in September to kind of prevent the strike that we're talking about now. So they didn't get that. They basically got a 24% raise, $11,000 in back bonus pay, and they also got prevented health insurance premiums, but they're not happy at all. And Biden is actually getting a lot of smoke for this because he's supposed to be like pro-union, but he said that he would go back and deal with getting paid sick leave for all workers, not just rail workers, but there has not been a timeline for him to actually, when he's going to actually do that.
And there was a bill that would have provided 7 days of paid sick leave for these rail workers. It got filibustered in the Senate, so is that pretty much dead on arrival?
Yeah. Well, it was introduced by Senator Bernie Sanders, and it was supposed to get 60 votes. I think it was like 52 votes that it got, so it was really short, and it didn't get the Republican support that they thought that it would get.
And how did this get done? You know, it is interesting that the other bill did get bipartisan support. Republicans and Democrats bought into this.
It's really interesting, but I really do feel bad for the workers. I'm not going to lie. I know a lot of people are happy that this didn't happen with the $2 billion a day loss that they said it would create, but it's definitely tough. I'm not sure. Well, it was something that I feel like a lot of people expected for a group not to be back with the 7-day leave, but I just want to say that just because Biden signed this legislation doesn't mean that I just feel like it's not gonna be for an official strike, but it doesn't mean like it's gonna be like workers can't like slow their pace and kind of make kind of ways to get what they want.
So you're saying there might be some actions that they take.
Strike, exactly.
Although we should mention that some unions were okay with that deal that Biden had okayed. I mean, is he going to face any political fallout from this, from his base, unions, labor?
I think publicly, I think he will face that. But let's face it, when you come down to what the American people want, they want their Christmas. And so they're sympathetic, but they're not ready to sacrifice being able to get the goods that they need in their homes.
All right, I want to bring up this national story because there are connections to Chicago. Dan Mihalopoulos, the former President Trump, has dinner with two, I think we can say, very public anti-Semites. One of them, Nick Fuentes, who's originally from Chicago, kind of a
western suburb.
Western suburbs, controversial pundit or whatever he is. And then Kanye West, who...
Probably the most famous musician from Chicago of this century.
But also maybe most famous anti-Semite right now. Republican leaders say there's no place for these ideologies, white supremacy, anti-Semitism in their party. But if you look at the fact that the guy trying to be Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, courts a representative like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who associates with someone like Nick Fuentes, can you conclude that indeed there has been a place, maybe a small place, in the GOP for these ideologies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kevin McCarthy, another thing that I remember with him, after the January 6th arrests were made of some of the people who entered the Capitol, one who was from the northwest suburbs had made a contribution to Kevin McCarthy and other Republican politicians locally. Some of those Republican politicians gave the money back. Kevin McCarthy didn't even call us back, much less give the money back. I think that it's interesting that there's a narrow margin for him to become the Speaker, and it seems to be very difficult for him to condemn the far right, and indeed he seems to be making deals with them in order to coalesce his power and become the Speaker. But Nick Fuentes, Kanye West, all you can say is two very different people that ended up together and continue to collaborate, as we saw. Not just anti-Semitism, as deplorable as that is, but also some misogyny if you watch some of this.
And
as a journalist,
authoritarianism, a non-belief in democracy.
Right, there was pro-Russia comments by Nick Fuentes, pro-Putin comments. So yeah, it's absolutely the whole gamut of offensive speech.
Is the fact that Trump had dinner with these folks, and there are some in the Republican Party calling it out, is this going to damage his hopes to be the leader and win the primary in 2024?
Is there something that can do that? But the bottom, let's face it, they argued. It was reported, if you actually go into the reports of what happened at the dinner, they were arguing with him. So I think this is another case where, yes, Trump shouldn't have invited them, but he can't be accused of actually embracing them either.
How could he not know who they were?
Yeah.
Don't they have to be vetted? For him to say, I don't know who Nick Fuentes is, isn't the Secret Service vetting anyone who's going to go face-to-face with the former president?
Yeah.
Other reports I saw were that he said that he was very impressed with Nick Fuentes, and that, yes, he was not going as far as maybe they would have liked, but that he said that his people, his advisors, were holding him back. So, again, was that a tacit embrace of some of the things?
Who knows what to believe, but I believe all four of you because you've been a great panel, but we are out of time. So our thanks to Craig Dellamore, A.D. Quigg, Corley J., and Dan Mihalopoulos. And that's our show for this Friday night. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe. Have a great weekend. Kanye West, I don't even want to pretend to figure out what's going on here.
They're not bad.
I couldn't.
When Alex Jones is trying to save you from yourself, you know
Exactly. He was like, well, you're not a Nazi. It's so unfair for them to say that. He was like,
but Nazis are bad, right? No, they're pretty good.
They did some good stuff. Microphones, highways, of which they did neither.
They did not do those. Where did he get that?
Yeah, I was like, is that true?
Autobahn was a Marshall Plan.
Right.
But, yeah.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.